I'll start. My name is Rod, and I like to party.
So you mean whiskey?
What?
You're saying it weird.
Saying what weird?
All of it.
Where do you get off?
Hey there, church planner and various sundry other people. Thank you for joining us today on the Church Planner Podcast. The Wednesday edition is back. I know that you've been dying to have us back in your ears weekly on the Church Planner Podcast. I know that Pete and Peyton on Mondays are they're a good appetizer, but you need a full meal. You need the real deal, and that's why we're here on Wednesdays, is to help you. My buddy Tim, who's been a part of it from last March until this fall, he was so great, and we had so much fun talking sports and movies and doing our smack talk, and then also jumping into ministry stuff. But schedule-wise, just been impossible. I blame him for being on the East Coast. If I had to blame anybody, I'm definitely blaming him for not being where I live. It seems fair to me. But we are back, and I have a new co-host, which, I don't want to say better or improved, but definitely just as handsome. Clearly just as handsome. I want to introduce you to one of my dearest and oldest friends, Mat Turcato. Welcome to the show, man.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I have never met this Tim guy, but he sounds good looking, so that's good. And I will say, I want to clarify, when you say one of your oldest friends, you don't mean that I am an older person than you are. You mean that we go way back, because it is clear to me that you're one of my oldest friends, both
That's
going back wise and in the sense that you're older than me. So.
See, you took something that was meant to be really nice and you turned it into something that was really mean, actually.
You said we were starting with smack talk. I just felt like that was just come in hot. That's how I do it. So
I'm so happy that you're here. Thank you for being on the show, man.
Absolutely. No, it was a pretty easy answer immediately when you reached out and asked me about this. I just saw it as an opportunity for us to connect and get to joke around a little bit. But I'm also excited to kind of just share kind of what the experience has been like. But it was an easy yes. So.
Well, welcome. We normally start with smack talk. You've listened to some episodes, you know that. But my thought was this week we kind of put it in reverse, and we start with getting to know you, and then we go to smack talk at the end, because we'll have things to talk about once people get to know you. Does that sound good? I'll just do an interview style with you today.
I love it.
And then we'll jump in. All right?
Sounds great.
All right. So, Matthew, I've known you for, 18, 19 years? Something like that?
Yeah.
17 years?
I am one of your oldest friends. I just realized that.
That's what I'm saying, man. It's been a long time. I met you as a college student at Boise State when I was working with Crew, and we were just doing life together. I think the first we were doing discipleship over the summer, and you and I sat around and talked about girls and phones, if I remember right. That was
one of the earliest memories I have. That I was sitting in your den area, and we were going through a short study of one of the books of the Bible, and I fell asleep. And you woke me up, and you said, "Hey, are you okay?" I was like, "Yeah, no, it's good. We're good." So so we've been through highs and lows together, but it's been an amazing journey, and I've loved every step along the way. So,
all right, well, walk us through. Tell us who you are and why you decide. Because the culmination of the journey is the last 7 years you and I have been planting Redemption Hill here in Boise together, our little corner of the world. And you have been an integral part of it from day one. Actually, I think we called you first when we invited friends to come join us in the journey. So I want to get to there, but let's start with, who is Mat Turcato? Where do you come from? Where were you raised? Why do you follow Jesus? Where were those significant moments along the way? Yeah, let's jump in, man.
Yeah, well, I am one of the rare Idahoans and Boiseans who get to say I was born and raised here. I grew up in Boise. Representing, exactly. Went to Hillcrest Elementary, stone's throw from your old house. So.
Oh yeah.
But nobody knows if people aren't from Idaho. They're like, what does that mean? Anyway, I lived here until I was about 8 years old, and when I was 8, my parents split up, and we moved to this little town called Baker City, Oregon, for a couple of years. My aunt lived there, and as soon as I could get out of that city, and convince my mom too. We did. I just didn't. I mean, moving to a new city when you're 8 years old, like 8 through 12, are like not ideal times to like relocate and try and make new friends. They're awkward years. But so we ended up moving back to Boise when I was 13. Like I said, my parents split up. My dad passed away when I was 13, and so we moved back to Emmett, Idaho, which is, believe it or not, I thought an upgrade from Baker City. And
That's a
it's
close. It's a
they're-
lateral move, at least.
exactly. Career-wise, it wasn't a promotion, but it wasn't a demotion. So, but the benefit there was that we were really closer to our family, and I felt like I fit it a little bit more. But growing up, I didn't really have a belief system. It feels weird to think about in the U.S., kind of just not knowing anything about Jesus, especially being part of a church for so long now. It just feels like everybody in the US knows about it. But I legitimately just didn't put any time or thought into spirituality as I was kind of growing up. And even through high school, I really chose to focus in on being liked and being likable, which is something I still struggle with to this day, as kind of the thing that drove me. And when I was about 18 years old, in a AP Lit class, we read a book called Life of Pi. It was recently adapted into a movie.
It wasn't recently. That was like 12 years ago, but yeah, sure.
remember, I'm not old. Yeah. And I just distinctly remember, actually, my wife recently, this is recent, she like probably 3 weeks ago, she was sick and she was looking for something to read. And so I gave her that. And I went back through and I was noticing some of the things that I underlined, but there was this one page where the boy is on a lifeboat. It's a spoiler alert, so sorry. But the boy's on a lifeboat with this Bengal tiger because his family's moving from India to Canada and they own a zoo. And he's listing all of the things that he has. So it starts off with like 300 rations of, like power bars or whatever. And it's going through and every line is decreasing. So the less things. And then it's like 4 life preservers, 1 Bengal tiger, 1 boy, 1 God. And I just remember like I underlined 1 God. And it was really probably one of the first times where I kind of like had this thought of like, whoa, is God a thing? And so my senior year of high school.
So that your senior year of high school was like when God, like
Yeah.
as an idea, flashed
Yeah.
in front of your head.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
I was all about just, I mean, I was a good kid growing up. I like my brothers, I love them, but they were all troublemakers. And so I tried to make my mom's life easy, and I did sports, but I didn't drink and I didn't cuss and I didn't get in trouble. And I just tried to be a really good kid. And I think that lended itself to being likable. So it just kind of, I was on the wrestling team and president of the French club and all these things that would
That was
garner
to
kind
meet
of
girls, obviously. The
of
French
course.
club thing.
Well,
Yeah.
again, God wasn't in the picture, so girls were the focus. But yeah, so it was literally halfway through my senior year, I kind of had this like, whoa, what is this? And I just said like, if there's a God out there, I want to kind of figure out what that looks like. And so I started doing research into most of the major world religions, and I was going to school out in Emmett. And so I had a bunch of friends who were Mormon, and they were more than happy to talk to me about spirituality and invite me to church with them. And one of my best buddies and a guy on the wrestling team just reached out to me and said, "Hey, I know you're looking into this spirituality thing. I've been going to this youth group at Eagle Christian Church, and would you be interested in just joining me?" And I walked in and kind of experienced kind of the first taste of church. Really, it was the first time I had been in a church in my life, which is kind of weird. Outside of like, I think I'd probably gone to like a Catholic church a couple times when I was younger, but just really enjoyed the youth group vibe. As somebody who wanted to be liked, it was a cool place to kind of plug in.
Early
But I met
2000s youth group vibe, man. That was
Yeah.
a different world. Different
It
world.
was.
Hit different
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah.
But I had the youth pastor, this awesome guy named Ben Smith, said, "Hey, can I take you out and grab an ice cream with you?" He came out to Emmett and took me to Roanne's Drive-In, and we got milkshakes, and he took me to the park, and he shared the gospel with me and laid it out and said, this is what I think God wants for your life. He wants to have this relationship with you. And And I was like, I think I want that, but I don't really know. And so he's like, oh, no pressure, but like I just want you to know it's a pretty great thing to give your life over to Jesus. And a couple weeks later, I called him up and I said, I'm in. I want to do this. So that's kind of where I started my faith journey. I also happened to meet a girl in youth group, and so I was.
You don't
I was.
say. You don't
I know.
say.
Can you wouldn't believe it. But we dated through the summer, and then my freshman year of college was the first time I'd gotten out of my house and had some freedom. And right before I started my freshman year, this girl reached out to me and said that she didn't think we should be dating anymore. And so I went into my freshman year of college just kind of like fundamentally feeling like my life was over. And unfortunately, college affords you a lot of opportunities to get into some trouble. And I distinctly remember one of the first parties. My roommates, I lived in the dorms in Chaffee Hall, and my roommates were saying, hey, you seem really down. We're going to go to this party tonight. Do you want to go with us? And I said, no, I'm a Christian. I'm not supposed to we don't go to parties. And they said, well, would you go be our DD? And I was like, that's exactly what Christians do. Like they would be a DD for people. And I went to this party with them, and they're like, just have a beer, man. And I tried this Coors Light, and it was gross.
Yeah.
And then they said, well, if you don't like that, try this. And they said it's called Jungle Juice, which is dangerous. And I was like, this is delicious.
A lot of bad decisions start with the words jungle juice. Yeah.
So basically that led to my first semester of college, just kind of like saying, like church hurts because there's this girl that I really like, but she doesn't like me. And so I don't want to do that. And this makes the hurt stop. And so I'm going to do this. My freshman year, I just partied and literally flunked out of school. And fortunately, my same buddy that invited me to that youth group asked me, he was one of my roommates, and he said, hey, I want you to look at like the last year of your life. You spent 6 months, the summer, following Jesus, on fire for God, good times. Last 6 months, you've been partying, you're not doing anything with your life, you failed out of college. He's like, which was better? And I just said, like, you're right. I definitely am not happy. It might not hurt, but I'm definitely not happy. And so he also said, hey, Boise State's not super close to the church that we were going to. But he's like, there's this on-campus group that I've been getting plugged into. It's called Campus Crusade. Would you want to go to an ice cream social with me? There's going to be girls there. And I said, that sounds fun. So I got plugged into Crew, and that was probably one of the most formational parts of my spiritual journey, was just for the next 4 or 5. Actually, I always joke that I went to college for about 8 or 9 years because it took me so long because I flunked out that first year. But
in the eternal words of Tommy Boy, a lot of people go to college for 7 years.
They're called doctors. That's right. I have an honorary doctorate from Boise State that is in form of a bachelor's in communication. So, but yeah, so got plugged into Crew and started meeting with one of the staff members there, being discipled, and really building the foundation of kind of what it looks like to not just go to church and be excited to be there because there's girls, but to have an authentic relationship with the God of the universe, and how to live out a life that he's calling us to, how to share my faith. And was able to go on a couple summer projects with Crew. That was huge for kind of my growth and development. But I'm a huge extrovert, so there was just all these opportunities to be really plugged into big groups of people, and that was still feeding, I think, this part of me that wanted to be liked and be loud, and I would stand on top of tables and make announcements. But it was also really foundational.
That's what you were looking for, was opportunities to stand on tables.
Exactly. Yeah. Fortunately, it also allowed me to meet my wife, who came to one of our Crew weekly meetings, and the first time she saw me was standing on a table directing people where to go, and the first time I saw her was at a game night that we hosted at our house playing Settlers of Catan. So we met. She'd already graduated from college because it was 4 years, and that's what most people do. And she was coming back to school to get some prereqs for a master's program. And so we met and that was another distraction from finishing school for me. But we got married, and yeah, so it was a lot of it. We part of it after we got married, rather than continue to hang out on college campuses, we helped do a high school ministry called Student Venture. That was another area where you and I got kind of reconnected. You were doing Student Venture at Mountain View, and we helped launch a Student Venture movement at Rocky Mountain. And so it was great to get plugged in with with high school kids, and I think that I've always had this affinity for 18 to 22-year olds, because that was really the time where I kind of came to know Jesus. And so I feel like I'm really great like hanging out with that age group. Anything younger than that, and I feel very uncomfortable. And honestly, anything older than that, I feel like I'm like, oh, what do I do with a 26-year-old? I don't know how to relate to them. So, but I feel like that period of time was really rich for me. And so I've always had a kind of a spot in my heart for high school, later high school, early college age kids, and being able to help kind of show them what it looks like to walk with Jesus. So a little bit more, we moved to Portland for a short period of time for work. I worked for Apple for 10 years, and I worked for Starbucks for 10 years, a little bit of overlap on those. So I spent a good amount of time doing retail and food service. And we enjoyed our time in Portland. While we were there, we had our daughter, Lily, and realized that living in a city where you don't have any family or really any relationships and having a kid is really hard. And so we were considering moving back to Boise. My wife's dad also kind of had developed cancer, and so that was another reason we were looking at moving back. But we really loved the church we were involved at. It's this little community called The Well in Portland, Oregon. We had both kind of growing up in churches, or in our 20s in churches in Boise, had been going to bigger churches where it was really easy to not get plugged in, and just kind of show up, leave, do that. And when we moved to Portland, we really loved, there's a pastor that we listened to a ton, and he was a pastor of a pretty big church, and we were like, let's go check that out. And I tried to get on a serving team or get plugged into a small group for like 3 weeks. Like every week I would go and I would talk to new people about like, hey, how do I get plugged in? And it wasn't happening. And the first time we went to this little church called The Well that my buddy, our mutual friend Joey, went to, the first weekend we went there, it was like a weird Sunday where they were doing all of the home groups were having a little table set up so you could kind of meet them. And one of the pastors was like, hey, you guys are new here. Why don't you just come to our home group like this week? And we're like, wow, that's really cool. Like we're already kind of feeling like we're plugged in. And then the next week that we went, it was a women's retreat. Ketty didn't go because we were still new. But so there was all of the women were gone. And so one of the other pastors was like, we need help down in kids ministry. Would you guys come down and help out? And like kids was like young kids. And we're like, all right. So like 2 weeks into this new church, we were at a home group, we're plugged in, and we're like, this is what we've been missing from like an authentic Christian community. Not that there wasn't authenticity in the communities we've been in before, but we just felt really plugged in, and we felt like these were our people. This was our home. This is what church was supposed to be like. So that was the hardest part about wanting to leave Portland for us, was this idea that we'd be leaving this community that we really felt called to and felt at home at. But you and Malia reached out to us literally, we came home for Christmas. We found out about Ketty's dad's cancer, and we started talking about it. We flew back, and we were actually renting out our house that we purchased here in Boise, and the tenant called us and said that he was moving to Salt Lake and he was going to have to leave the house. And we're like, wow, that's crazy. And one of the managers of the Apple store here in Boise said he was moving, so there's going to be this manager position. It was like all these things felt like they were drawing us back. And then when we flew back, you and Malia said, hey, we'd love to just do a Zoom call and kind of talk to you. And you'd shared that you were going to be moving back from Boston to Boise to plant a church. And like that was like the light switch for us, where we were like, this is it. This is this opportunity to like be part of this community. And it's been amazing. That's crazy. You said 7 years. Again, it feels like that means we must have planted about 5 years after Life of Pi, the movie, came out. So
yeah, that's how I measure most time, is that
exactly.
relationship to the release of Left by.
Yeah. So and then the last 7 years apparently they've been awesome. It's been a roller coaster, helping to really be one of the first families that was part of the launch team, to launching, to planting a church through COVID, to moving locations, and it's been a really cool space. I've had the opportunity to help lead a couple different teams with Redemption Hill, from hospitality to tech, and it's been like that kind of like I mentioned, it always felt like before something was missing from church, and I think part of it was just the invitation to be the doers, not the receivers of church. And Redemption Hill is definitely a place where you can't just come and receive. Eventually, someone's going to ask you to do something. So
pretty quick,
it's been great.
You're going to get asked to do something, because that's how you know you're part of the family, is if you serve, right?
Yep. So that's the TLDR of me.
TLDR, man. That we don't use that. We're pretty old around here.
Okay.
So maybe you could explain that to some of the older people that don't understand what
Oh,
TLDR.
I guess I didn't actually use it right, because that's not the TLDR. That's the long part. The TLDR would be
too
like,
long.
I'm a guy who grew up in Idaho and helped plant a church in Boise with my friend Robert Frazier.
Killed it. TLDR, man.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So,
well, okay. Before we jump into a little bit of smack talk, because we got a lot to talk about, and we're gonna have months and months to do it. So, let's start with when I asked you to plant the church, what did you think I was asking you to do? What surprised you in that journey? Like as this gone on, what were you expecting? What was different?
yeah, I think the expectations from somebody who had never planted a church or seen a church be planted, and had only attended really a couple big churches with large congregations, and then one kind of like the Well in Portland was this really small. It felt more just like this collection of people who get together to worship Jesus. But I think knowing you and the way that you are, my thought process was like, okay, this is going to be this system thing of kind of brick by brick building this big thing. Because you're a pretty entrepreneurial guy that likes to build things up. And so I think my thought process was like, okay, what can we do to help when we move back to Boise to build this church? And I think that was the wrong way to view coming back to plant a church. And really, I think probably for the best. There's parts of the time where I felt like that view of kind of this is what we're doing got in the way of really organically allowing Redemption Hill to do what we wanted, because it felt like we were trying to be really systematic and programmatic with what church is supposed to be. And some of the best moments in, I think, our history of Redemption Hill is when we let go of that and we just said, like, whatever happens here is okay, as long as God's at the center of it and is part of it. And when we stop trying to kind of get in the way of that organic spirit movement, we've seen some really cool flourishing. But for me, I helped. I love technology, and I love kind of helping get things done. And so, one of the quickest ways that I jumped in and was a part of that was to help lead and build out a tech team. And I think for me that was probably the biggest place that I saw that me getting in my own way was this idea that this is what church is. Church is a band playing at the front, and good lighting and good sound, and the slides look nice, and if you can get all those things to happen, then church is going well. And sometimes it felt like we were putting so much energy, or I was helping lead this team that was trying to put so much energy into that, and really God was stirring in the hearts of the people in the chairs, and we were focused. I was at least focusing less on that. It was like, I can help them have this great worship experience if the light cues switch when the band goes to the chorus, and it's like, that's not important. And that's definitely not what Redemption Hill is now. And I love it because, like I said, when we let go of that, and it's like, oh, we just want to have really simple space where people can encounter God, not encounter a show or a production. It has really made a big difference, and it's been awesome to see.
Well, and that felt like an existential crisis from day one on some level, where we were fighting through everybody's expectations of we need to create something that no one is going to be able to say no to because it's so great. and everybody was feeling all this like angst about being, some level successful, some level serving in hospitality was like in there, but a lot of it was we just didn't want to fail. Like no one wanted to
Yeah.
mess up this thing.
Yeah, to the point where it felt like even if things weren't going well with what we were doing at church, as long as the Sunday service went off well, it felt like we were
Yeah.
doing what good. It's like, oh, this is great. I mean, people don't feel like they're getting plugged in or they're authentically growing or they're having this, this relational community, but the podcast sounds good. The lights are all right for what they were in a gym. And again, it was like this, and I
It's
think
so
that's
easy
still
to
a
focus
struggle.
on that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually we just did a tech training at Redemption Hill last night, and I was talking with one of our worship leaders, Clint. That's still a struggle. Is this like idea that I do have high expectations for how I know we can do it, but that's not the most important thing. And so there's this tension, and I think this is I've never planted a church before, and I wasn't even really part of leading teams at the churches I was at before. But there's this tension between like saying, hey, we're just not going to worry and it's going to be disorganized and it's not going to look good and it's not going to sound good and people just need to come. Eventually people don't want to come to that. So there's this like fine line that you have to thread. And I think that's been, for me, that's been a huge part of the growth that I feel like I've had as a leader on the teams that I've led, is like, where can I say it's okay for us to not be perfect, but where can I also say we should still have these standards that allow us to create the space for people to come and meet with God and to want to come back to. And it's
Well, and there was
tricky.
this kind of like a fight between how sophisticated can we make this so that it's very efficient? How can,
Mhm.
we like, you and I love cool tech stuff and automations, and we loved looking at how could we make these queues work on their own so that we only need one person to run like we're always trying to
Those
be
are the
so efficient.
days.
But actually when you look at it, part of our problem was that we were thinking about it in terms of getting the stuff done instead of
Mhm.
who were we developing and
Yep.
where was there space for relational equity
Mhm.
to be built into people during it. And I feel like we made a shift probably, I don't know, 3, 4 years ago, where we just said we're going to stop trying to do things in the minimal, most efficient way possible, and we're going to
Mhm.
focus on a culture
Yep.
of developing people. And that felt like it was the switch that we all needed to give permission to
Mhm.
grow through people rather than grow through excellence.
Yeah.
And that's, we talk a lot about that on Church Planter Podcast, is that you grow by developing people, not by putting on a show. So it feels like
Yeah.
that's a piece that we had to learn to get there. What you've been a part of our leadership team, and you've led teams, and you've also like led what we called missional communities, and then now we call micro church. Um, what what has God been doing in you in the midst of as growing as a leader and as a person over the last 7 years? A lot, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned that kind of shift 3 or 4 years ago. I think that was probably one of the biggest spaces where God was working in me. Because I think prior to that, it did feel like, both with tech and with hospitality, like I needed to be there all the time to make sure everything was working perfectly, whether it was the lights cues were right. And I've never have, yeah, I feel very strongly that like care about people first. And so I was never like this tech leader who was like, hey, you missed that cue, or hey, the slides were off. It was always done with care, but there was this level of expectation for what things needed to look like, and what the standard was that we needed to meet. And I think that looking back on it, like that creates a barrier to people wanting to continue to serve. And really, I was valuing, again, that production more than I was valuing the team. Not that I was devaluing them or feeling like I was ostracizing them, but like if the first thing that I would do after a service wasn't to say, hey, thank you so much for being on our team and for helping to serve and for doing that today. But if the first thing I was doing was saying like, hey, how can we make this better? Eventually the team doesn't feel like they really are cared for and being shepherded, and so it also burnt me out. I mean, and I think that we experienced that on a larger scale with some of our leaders, was just like everyone felt like they had to be on, and they needed to be the people that were moving things forward. We had these key leaders that were helping lead teams. And so for me, you mentioned 3 or 4 years ago, I kind of took a step back from leading a team or tech or really doing much outside of just kind of like I needed this space to refresh. And what God has kind of shown me through that is, I think where we're going now is this idea that like again, rather than have it be perfect, have people feel like they're part of what we're doing. And we're invited, like we did this tech training last night and I loved it because the 4 of the people that showed up were like teenagers, literally like
Love it.
11 through 15. And it was like, in like, there's this old part of me that was like, this is going to be challenging and this is opportunity for things not to go right. But there's, I think what God has been doing is like, hey, how are we actually bringing the next generation into serving and doing it in a way that I know that that's going to create some space for it to not go perfectly, but it does allow them to feel like they're invested in what we're doing and what God's doing. And we had this amazing, we talked about all the technical aspects of how to do it, but then we ended with this conversation around like, why do we serve on tech? Is like, we want to create the space where people can have this authentic encounter with God, and we can do it without being distractions. And so like to take, these kids through that, like that's a different level um of expectation and of kind of really what we're aiming to do than to again put on the show. And so that's been cool. Additionally, over the last few years, it's been cool for me to feel like I've had the space and the capacity to give things over and to not need to be at the center of it. Now I say that as somebody who just still loves to be in the back in the booth, but like that I don't have to be there. Most of the Sundays that I am not, serving literally in the booth, being able to say like I can sit in those chairs and not have to worry about what's going on back there because it doesn't matter, because the team is equipped to do their job well. And even if something goes wrong, it's not the biggest deal. Like that's been a big shift that God's had to change in me. And that's church planter related, or planting a church related, but it's also been part of my identity work that God's doing in me, is this like idea that perfection doesn't have to be there. You don't have to be perfectly polished and shiny for the people around you. You can let the cracks show. That's been kind of the stuff that God's been doing in my heart. So.
Yeah. Well, just to give like the other side of that, as someone who's leading like the church while that was happening in your life, you had times where you were leaned in all the way and took ownership over everything tech, and there's times where you had to pull back and had to kind of reassess where you had space and time. There were times where the team was being cared for, and there's times where the team wasn't being cared for. And my temptation as a leader is always to jump in and take action and try to fix whatever problem there was. And you experienced me overstepping because I know tech and I can jump in and I do things that I don't consult you on. So you've had this like long like tenure of like in and out of leadership in this space. But what I want to touch on is that giving you space to grow through that and to become somebody who could lead a team that was raising up new leaders, that took time. Like it wasn't an overnight thing, and your character and your competency and your relationship with God and like even your perspective on worship and all this stuff had to shift over time through training, through relationship, through all that stuff. And now you're at a spot where you see it in a way that's really healthy. You're growing a team, and we have a really unique worship thing. I don't even know if I've talked about it on the podcast, but our friends invited us to worship in their building, and our worship and tech teams share. They do both services together as one team, and so you're kind of leading a dual team of Discovery people and Redemption Hill people working together. So, like, it's really complex. But what's happened is you've grown, and that's the win. The win wasn't us having lots of great services where everything worked fine. The growth was your character and leadership, and like that's our goal, is to see people become who they're meant to be, not to build a great organization. And that can feel. I talk with church planners all the time, and I tell them this, and they nod their head like they're like, oh yeah, I'm going to develop people. But what happens is, as soon as something goes wrong on a Sunday morning and a family leaves that week, then you just go right back to full on control, have to manage the Sunday gathering. It has to be perfect. I'm going to demand excellence because that's the way of the Lord is excellence, not grace. And so like there's all this temptation as a church planner to do that. But it's like you over time have had space to work that out, and that's cool. That's really cool.
Yeah.
And
As you
it
said
wasn't
that,
just neglect on my part.
Yeah, well, probably
There's
not.
some neglect.
No, as you were saying that, I think that's like a shift that changed. Was like I would say, kind of prior to all this, like this idea was like I want to do this. Like I would say, I want to do this well because it's honoring to God when we can produce this great worship to Him.
Yeah.
And like that was a wrong mentality, but that was also like that was a really my experience prior to Redemption Hill was very consumer. Like you go to we went to churches that had really high production value and
Thousands
good
of people.
exactly.
Yep.
And so it was like
Full-time staff
that's what
were
it looked
leading
like.
those. Yep.
And trying to do that with this ragtag team
With
of
40 people.
4 people, and literally after the kids left, it was like sometimes 10 people in the room.
Oh yeah.
Was like
it was like
it
a
would
Bible
feel like
study
there
with
was this
full time.
yeah. It's like this is how I have to honor God is by helping produce this thing. And now this kind of shift is like the way that we can honor God is by allowing our people to worship well. And that doesn't mean that everything has to sound 100% perfect and that slides can be a little bit out of order. And that's okay. We don't want it to be a distraction, but like that's not the heart of it. The heart of it isn't, did we do everything perfectly? The heart of it was like, did we create space for people to have this authentic and I say that about the people sitting in chairs, but I also say that for their team that's serving. Like if they feel like the expectations are so high, it can be really hard for them to feel like they can come to the tech booth and serve God well, because it's like I'm not serving God, I'm kind of serving Matt because he's the one that has the expectation. That's a problem. And so allowing that space and the grace and the coaching and the ability to say like, hey, like we're gonna, like we said it last night, you're gonna make mistakes. It's gonna happen eventually. You're gonna take it harder than you probably should because it feels like when you hit to the wrong slide, everyone looks back and goes, "Why'd you do that?" So you're gonna feel worse than you did, but just know that that's gonna be part of it, and like creating that space for people to enter in and feel the grace to be able to like serve God and not have to do it the right way, the perfect way, or they can't, has been a big win, I think, for our teams, all of our teams, not just tech. But
excellent. Well, we've got more time to talk, and we'll have more episodes. You're going to be on twice a month with a conversation with me, helping kind of suss stuff out, and then we'll do interviews on the other weeks. So Wednesdays are coming up. First, I did want to have a little bit of smack talk, at least a little bit. So obviously, big sports week. You and I were together on Sunday, watching that.
I think collectively we ate 60 pounds of food. I mean, it felt like,
oh man,
I've never eaten so much food in my life.
I've not felt right for 5 days now. Like there's something deeply wrong with my body that will not be. I'm gonna need to eat like 30 pounds of salad just to kind of work through the fibrous needs.
I'd rather just starve myself for a month, which is more my MO. But I'm not doing that, to be clear. But yeah, it was.
You've seen those Instagrams where the guy's like, "When I eat fruit, I feel much better." And
yeah,
his
I
wife
think
goes,
I said that
when you eat fruit.
Yeah. He goes, yeah. She goes, don't you eat fruit every day? And he's, no, I don't know anybody that eats fruit every day. And then she goes, I feel. And then they call all of his friends, and none of them say they eat fruit all the time. And she goes, I feel like maybe I'm eating too much fruit. And he goes, yeah, you're probably drinking too much water too. She goes, how much water do you drink? And he goes, oh, like 3 cups of coffee. Yes,
I eat maybe 1 piece of fruit a week, maybe 2.
Yeah. I texted you and our buddy Joe, and I said, how much fruit do you guys eat? You said 1 a week. Joe said every day, which he does smoothies, so it doesn't. Smoothies are a great way to
juice. That's like saying I drink because cola has corn in it, and corn's kind of a fruit. That's like that's like saying you eat.
Robert, I think that I think most doctors would say a strawberry banana smoothie and a diet cola are probably a little different on that health spectrum.
I'm gonna have to disagree with you there. So let's dive in. What did you think about the Super Bowl? Did you think that the right team won? Let's start there.
I will say, I said it the night of, as it was happening, it was the best Super Bowl I ever watched. I think that's an unbiased, unobjective thing, to which you immediately retorted that the Patriots comeback over the Falcons was better. But I think that has a bunch of built-in bias to it. But from just a game,
That has
was,
bias, but I'd also say that the Seattle game with the Malcolm Butler ending was also a stunning
imagine that
ending.
the two best Super Bowls you've ever watched both involve the Patriots
I think
winning.
you could also make the case that the Giants beating the Patriots were better Super Bowls too, because they were just freak accidents.
So the first half was lackluster. It was defensive, but it was all right. But man, the last hour of the game, so the fourth quarter and overtime, was just I could not tear myself away from watching and just feeling really invested. I think it was great. I mean, I think that the right team won, absolutely. I think that the Chiefs are a better organization and team collectively, but I mean, San Francisco's got all the talent, but I think
anytime something goes to overtime, you got to say those two teams are equally matched, and whatever happens. Like, it's not like, for me, it's like neither team was better. They just got more lucky at the end.
At any moment in the last drive, it could have been. I mean, Mahomes had an amazing run for first down, but I think just overall, like, I think Patrick Mahomes is an amazing quarterback, and I think his team is great. I said before the game, I thought if it was close at the end, that the Chiefs had the advantage, just because that's what Mahomes does. There's a lot of pundits.
He's a 2-minute drill guy, man.
It's crazy. I mean, and to the point where it's like even the field goal tying drive. It's like San Francisco never stopped him. They ran out of time, I think it was just really fun to watch. And as somebody who really loves sports and who really loves football, like, that was a great culmination. And then it felt like immediately afterwards, it felt like, oh, it's over. All right, we're in this spot where it's like
great sports moments. You don't forget them. Yeah, you remember where you were at.
Yep.
And watching it with two of your best friends is also like tons of fun too. Like, that's And Eric, our friend who's like a San Francisco fan, wasn't there, which is probably good, because that would have been hard for him to be there.
Yeah,
with us.
I do like that. Our host's son was upstairs watching the game, and he was about 30 seconds behind. There was just this delay, and so we were seeing what was happening, and he was really rooting for the 49ers, and just losing. So we saw everything happen, and then, like, 30 seconds after the Chiefs score the game-winning touchdown, we just hear from upstairs this, like, agonizing cry of "ah!" But it was, I mean, that's sports. It was wonderful, and good times. Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce are in love, apparently.
And
legitimately in love.
They want to cancel Travis for getting in Andy Reid's face.
Do you watch the New Heights podcast?
No, I didn't. Did they talk about it this week?
They definitely talked about it. And he recognizes it was a mistake and that he shouldn't have done that. But it's the Super Bowl.
He's also a 33-year-old veteran or whatever too.
Yeah,
so
it's the Super Bowl. It's like the highest. Yeah. He said, he's like, I wasn't frustrated with Coach Reid. I was frustrated with myself and with our team. I get it. It still doesn't look good. And he pushed an old man. But there, I think
a nearly 70-year-old man almost pushed him over. He almost gave him a heart attack. Is what
I think Travis Kelce said, if Coach Reid had turned around and punched me, I would have just had to eat it because I was in the wrong there. So that's sports. Like, you get, like, where you and I are both pretty competitive, it seems like, and so when you get in that space, I'm not gonna. I mean, both of us are. So I'm not excusing the actions, but I think that, like, it's hard to say if you're at literally the pinnacle of the highest, like, event in your field, and the emotions are there, stakes are so high that you're so frustrated. It's hard to control yourself. I get mad in games of Settlers that we play. So
yeah. You should, man. I wish I could show everybody how intense you are, because it is scary and beautiful all at the same time.
I've gotten better in my old age.
Yeah, you have definitely. Yeah. Unless we're playing
Egyptian Massacre.
Egyptian
with
Massacre
Amanda.
You lose your mind. It is so great. Hey,
some of the best.
Thank you for joining us, man. For being a part of the Church Planner podcast team. We got to get you together with Pete and Peyton and let you get to know those guys. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We're back on Wednesdays. Make sure to tune in. We're going to be having a giveaway for some conference tickets, registrations to the Micro Church Conference. So be paying attention on Instagram at Church Planner Podcast. And remember, if you want to reach the people no one else is reaching, you've got to go where no one else is going and do what no one else is doing. Love you, friends. See you next week.